last letters, and further records of martyred missionaries of the China Inland Mission, dated 1901, Part 4. Yet a little while, and through grace we may join that blessed throng to sing the praises of Christ throughout eternity. I neither hunger nor thirst, though 5 days without food. Marvelous loving kindness to me, a sinner. Your affectionate brother in Christ, Captain Allen F. Gardner. We knew not where we should find lodging, nor how we should get food, for we were moneyless, having only what clothes we wore, baby's quilt and pillow, the saucepan, and a little bag of flour to make gruel for baby, and my scissors. But he who said, the foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head, who had for our sakes become poor, and for whose sake we are now poor, had not forsaken us. He had said, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment? Had we not come to China in full reliance upon him? Before leaving Sweden for China, I had said, the Lord will care for me, and if not, I am willing to go through starvation into heaven. Was he not now going to take care of me at his word? I wondered. Or would he only try me? However it be, I felt that to die of starvation for Jesus, who died for me, was easy. I found it true. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. O. Ogren. A Great Conflict of Sufferings by Mrs. Ogren, O-G-R-E-N. Inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, rejoice. In the early summer of 1899, after 6 years of work in the north of the province of Shaanxi, my husband and I settled in the city of Yangningchao, about 5 days' journey to the southwest of Taiyangfu, the capital. Though the city had been visited before, we were the first missionaries to commence settled work there. The people, though of a bold and independent character, were quiet and well-disposed towards us. The long-continued drought and threatened famine made the people become restless and threatening, and so eager was the official to obtain rain that, finding his prayers in the temple had failed, he even secretly asked my husband how to pray to the God of heaven and earth. In May 1900, the Boxer trouble commenced in the south of the province, and about the middle of June, 2 men arrived in our city, who announced themselves as merchants, though they had no goods to sell. Their dialect, too, was that of Shantung, and they were soon followed by other similar mysterious persons. The Boxers had come. Whispers soon were repeated among the awestruck people to the effect that the Boxers wore buttons that kindled fires, cellulose, and that they were stealing girls to recruit the Red Lantern Society. Absurd stories stating the arrival of the foreign soldiers in packing cases, and that the heavenly soldiers, as the Boxers were called, had flown away into heaven at their approach. The early fears and suspicions which the people had of the Boxers were soon exchanged for unbounded confidence, and they quickly enrolled themselves as their followers. Evil reports as to our poisoning the wells were spread abroad, and the neighboring well was evidently tampered with, for its water all turned red. On June 5th, we heard of the rumor of 2 ladies, Mrs. Whitchurch and Cyril, at HIAO-I. And the official who had so far sought to be friendly told us we must endeavor to escape from the city. This we agreed to do. We had already cut a secret door through the back door of our garden, which we had plastered over, that it might be ready for escape if necessary. For some time we had not been able to receive monies from the coast, but for our needful traveling expense, the secretary from the Yemen brought us £15 one night after midnight. For this, we gave a receipt, and having handed over our property to the official, prepared to flee. Arrangements were all made that we should start for the Yellow River, 25 miles away. In the dim twilight of the breaking day, July 13th, a mule litter reached our door, which we silently mounted and started on our long journey to Hankow. Only God knew what lay before us, how we should longingly look towards our home for rest and safety, but how our roads must part, one going to the old land and home beyond the seas, and the other to the better land and home above. We reached the Yellow River, CHIH-KOU, where we found the people openly hostile. It was only by the stringent orders of the official and the assistance of our guard that we were able to hire a small boat to take us as far as Tangkuan, for which we had to pay £7. The official did his best to show us favor, but as we left, we heard the people both yelling and spitting at us. The one whose name is Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, had helped and restrained our enemies, for we heard that the poor, famine-stricken crowd were all armed with clubs to kill us. Down the rapid river, our little boat swept along, keeping us in constant fear of shipwreck. So swift is the current that boats never ascend the river, but all the boats used are sold for a small sum at Tangkuan, their destination. That day we traveled 17 miles and stopped at a place where our guard had to be changed. We found our money was not enough for us to proceed, so we sent back word to the friendly official, and after 4 weary days of waiting, the same kind secretary, CHEN, appeared with more money. Praising God for all His goodness, we started once more, and though beset by many difficulties, the goodness of God and the cordial letter of the recommendation granted us by our friendly mandarin enabled us to safely reach a place called Longwangchong, 170 miles from our starting place, and halfway to our destination, Tung-Kuan. At this spot there is a most dangerous rapid, and all the boats have to be dragged on shore for more than 3 miles and launched below the rapids again. It was here we heard of the massacre of the McConnelly and Young's party, and realized that no letter of recommendation could bring us safely through the dangers ahead. Near our halting place, we found an old ex-official, about 80 years of age, who knew our Yangning Mandarin, and for his sake he showed us kindness. He promised to hide us in his home, which was in Shangxi, some 25 miles from the river. Before we started, we were suddenly startled by the arrival of 33 soldiers under 2 officials, who were said to come from Pingyangfu, with orders to drive us out of the province. Through the mediation of the old ex-official, who gave these men a feast, we were not molested, though they robbed our evangelist of the last little money he had left in his care. And after this, we never saw him again. And now began a painful chapter of wanderings. We started for the home of the old ex-official, as promised, but had not proceeded far before we saw some men skulking about among the rocks ahead. Though much alarmed, we could do nothing but go forward, like Israel at the Red Sea. On one side were steepy rocky mountains, on the other the rushing muddy torrent. Behind, who knew how many enemies waited for us, and ahead our foes were crouching in our sight behind the rocks. I was riding on a mule, our things were packed on another, and my husband followed behind carrying a little Samuel. As I came to the rock, out sprang the men, brandishing their weapons and yelling their orders for us to stop. They demanded £40. I got down from the mule and went up to the man who was swinging his great sword. I begged him to have mercy on us, to take all else, but spare some few things for the baby. Perhaps he felt some pity, for when they were rifling our things, he reached me a little baby shirt on the point of his sword. After they had taken all they wanted, the man with the sword began welding it with the strange boxer movements, shouting "kill" at the same time. We thought our last hour had come, and expected that soon our dead bodies would be hurled into the rushing river. They, however, heard our pleas for mercy and spared us. We now felt our lives depended on getting out of Shaanxi as soon as possible, so we crossed the river into Shaanxi. Well, for us, we did. For early next morning, 22 soldiers came with orders to arrest us, but we were already beyond their power. It was dark and raining when we landed from the ferry on the Shaanxi side, and only by the promise of a reward were we permitted to share the black and smoky caves where the ferrymen lived. Here we waited 4 long days, hoping the old ex-official would send us help in answer to our earnest request. On the 4th day, a man came with a little help, but we were fleeced of nearly all this before the ferrymen would allow us to depart. And now we started on a weary tramp across the rough mountains to the place of the refuge offered. In the great heat, often was I so parched with thirst that I sank down exhausted by the way. On the 2nd day, we reached the farm where the refuge had been promised, but the tenant's wife refused us food, and we were barely permitted to use a cave outside the farmyard. Here we were stripped of all by 2 bands of robbers, and at last we hid in a cave deep in the mountains, but so small that my husband had to dig out lumps of earth, both to get more room and to make a screen to hide us from the shepherds. Though safely hidden from the robbers, we could not live without food. We had only cold water and a little raw flour for our poor 9-month-old baby. At last, compelled by hunger, we crept out of the hole and back to the farm, only to receive a rough welcome from the angry and cruel men, though the women were more kind. It cut me to the heart to see my husband and child suffer so much for hunger. I could endure the hunger much better than they. Sometimes my husband was in awful agony of pain from hunger. But when I grieved about it, he said, "It is no matter what we suffer for Jesus' sake." In the midst of hunger and privation, he would say, "I rejoice that through these sufferings the church will be awakened into new life. The field is being watered with blood. What a harvest there will be." He, too, was soon to join those who had shed their blood for the poor China, and his comfort was in the assurance that the sower and the reaper shall rejoice together. We tried to arrange with the tenant's son-in-law, a most villainous-looking fellow, to go to our old friend, the ex-official, and get us some help, but in vain. This wretched youth had heard the boxer's offer of 15 pounds for every foreigner's head, and he began to rave like a madman and snatched up his sword and rushed at us. Had not his wife and relatives held him back, we should surely have been killed. We now saw that to stay longer was impossible, and hoping that the war would soon be at an end, we thought the best thing we could do was to get back to our city of Yangning and go on with our work. We felt safer in Shaanxi than in Shaanxi, so thought of going north till opposite Yangni, then cross the river and hurry secretly into the city and ask protection from the official, who we were sure would do all he could to help us. I still had my foreign scissors, and hoped we could persuade the ferryman to take them for our passage money. Next morning, we turned our faces homeward. How we longed for home and rest once more after all our sufferings. But what a long, toilsome way lay before us. We knew not where we should find lodging, nor how we should get food, for we were moneyless, having only what clothes we wore, baby's quilt and pillow, the saucepan, and a little bag of flour to make gruel for baby, and my scissors. But he who said, "The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head," who had for our sakes become poor, and for whose sake we were now poor, had not forsaken us. He had said, "Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment?" Had we not come to China in full reliance upon him before leaving Sweden for China? And I said, "The Lord will care for me, and if not, I am willing to go through starvation into heaven." Was he now to try me at my word? I wondered. Or would he only try me? However it be, I felt that to die of starvation for Jesus, who died for me, was easy. I found it true. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. When we started for the farm, the people had to hold back the tenant's son-in-law, who again, raging like a madman, sought to attack us. Avoiding the larger roads, we followed the bypaths, sometimes creeping on hands and feet up the steep paths on the mountainside. The people whom we met treated us kindly, and we received at least food once a day and a lodging at night. On the third day, we came to a large river called the Fen, F-E-N, which we had to cross. Though we were told it was fordable at places, we could not find a way over. And we had almost concluded to turn back when we saw an old man coming towards us. He agreed to show us the way. The current was so swift it made one dizzy to look down, and the water was so deep it was difficult to wade. The old man took my hand to keep me from being carried away, and I, by faith, looking up to God, took hold of the hand of him who said, "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers thou shalt not overflow thee." When we had crossed the river, the old man showed us the way to his village. So God gave us not only a guide across the river, but also a lodging place, for it was now sunset, and the region very desert-like. Weak as we were, it was a hard climb up the bank to the village. The people received us very kindly, and supposing the next day was Sunday, we concluded to stop the day. When we again set out upon our journey, after a long day of weary traveling, towards sunset we suddenly came out of a narrow gully, close to a large village, where we saw the flags of a customs barrier flying. We turned back. It was useless, as we had been seen, so we determined to pass on, right through the village, whatever might happen. The crowd gathered and made ribald sport at our expense, shouting in their diabolic key. After we had passed through the village, we were seized by some bad-looking ruffians who had followed. These men, who proved to be the underlings employed in the custom office, led us away to a temple, where we were locked up during the night, in a tumble-down sort of prison. The next morning, 2 men were appointed to escort and drive us out of the province. The younger of the 2 was an evil-countenanced, but unarmed rogue. The elder, who looked far more villainous, carried a sword, which he kept prominently in view. Our little stock of belongings was again overhauled, and the feathers from Samuel's little pillow were emptied out and maliciously burned. One of them seized my Bible, but the vehemence with which I declared I could not and would not part with the holy book seemed to touch the heart of even this ruffian with his murderous sword, and after turning over the leaves a little, he hesitatingly handed it back to me. These men led us on through a wild, desolate gully in the mountains, and on one occasion took us aside into a deep pit-like ravine, where they told us to sit down and rest. Fearing foul play, we refused to do so, and were then taken to the summit of a hill, and again ordered to sit down, but we again refused. When night came on, we slept in our thin garments on the cold, bare stones of a temple floor, and were only too glad for morning light, that we might get warm by walking. We were now nearing the Yellow River, and we pleaded to be released, but sure of a reward from the Boxers, they refused to do so. Our captors compelled the ferrymen to take us over free, and when we saw the red lanterns hanging outside one of the houses on the other side, we knew the place was held by Boxers. We were at last really in the hands of the Boxers. They did not harm us, but led my husband into a shop with the red lantern over the door to have a talk with him. A crowd gathered around me and Samuel, and one man, cocking his head at one side with a sardonic grin, told me, "The Tangyin missionaries have gone back to heaven." By this I knew the ladies there had been murdered.
The Boxer movement, though allied to the numerous secret societies of China, was not itself secret, but on the contrary was recognized and protected by the government. Teachers of the new practices went far and wide, and the sect also spread by means of printed incantations, scattered and used where no teachers went. When anyone sought the help of the spirits, he first marked a circle on the ground, large enough to stand in. This circle he then bisected with a straight line, across which he marked 3 other short lines. Taking a stand upon these crosses, facing southeast, he would bow respectively as to an honored guest, and then begin reciting some long incantation. This was repeated again and again until the spirit took possession, when he would fall backwards flat upon the ground. When in a few minutes his arms and legs began to work spasmodically, he would sit up and slap his thighs and body, then rising to his feet would whirl and throw his limbs about in motion similar to those of a trained fighter. As soon as he began to mutter the word, a sword would be handed to him, which he would whirl around as in Chinese drill. All this time his eyes had remained closed, but at a touch on the forehead from his leader, his eyes would open as though waking from sleep. In the early days, the candidate would need to repeat the incantations many times, and when the spirit left him, he would be greatly exhausted. But some more quickly, some more slowly, would become mediums, so that as soon as they faced southeast and began the incantations, the frenzy would come upon them without falling down or closing the eyes. Having reached this stage, he was considered a fully trained boxer, ready to fulfill the will of the spirit in exterminating everything foreign. For foreigners, no ransom could be accepted, but they would rob, blackmail, and torture Christians. About the boxers gathered a crowd of professional rowdies and outlaws who sought to enrich themselves as boxer assistants. Some were the men who had brought us to this place. The boxers were divided into 8 clans, following the 8 mystic symbols of Chinese geomancy, and each clan had its distinctive color, white, red, black, etc. This division into clans gave the society the name of I-HO-TUAN, volunteers. TUAN being the Chinese for a compact group of individuals. The name IHOCHUAN, boxers, came from the fighters or gymnastic exercisers of the spirit-moved persons. CHUAN means a fist or to use the fist. A large proportion of the boxers were boys, as they were more susceptible to the spirits than mature men. Many children were won from among the poor people by the promised perpetual safety from all calamity if they would give their sons to the righteous crusade. By the people they were called heavenly soldiers, as they were under the control of the spirits who had come down from heaven. It was reported in Shaanxi that as soon as foreign troops attacked boxers, the latter would fly away to heaven out of the reach of bullets. There was also a society called Hong Ting Chiu, composed of women. The members of this Red Lantern Society, as the name means, were said to be able to fly to foreign countries, where they burnt down houses and cut off heads at will. Many of the more intelligent people said the movement would be short-lived and advertised the Christians to hide for a while, and all would be right. But I must return to our experiences. After my husband had been some time in the shop, he was let out, and we were told we should be taken back to our home at Yangning. This was doubtless to beguile us into following them, for we were led east instead of north, and we knew we were being taken to Tangning, which was only 20 miles away. That evening we were taken 2 miles to a village where Boxer flags were flying, where we were locked up in a cave. I was utterly exhausted, and the heat and glare had caused my eye to become very painful and swollen, so that night I thought it better to die than to live. Next day, though my eye was so swollen I could not see with it, we were compelled to travel till near sunset. We reached a village called Teo Qing'eo, 10 miles from Taining, where the Boxer General had his headquarters. When we reached a temple where the Boxer General was, we heard a stern voice say, "Bring in the man." My husband seemed much dejected, but was encouraged and helped by a verse the Lord had given me. "Fear not, for I am with thee. The young man who had escorted us led my husband in, then, returning, took me into the outer courtyard, where I sat down upon a stone with Samuel on my knee. I could hear my husband speaking in pleading tones to someone in the temple. He was telling them who we were and whence we came, when he was quickly interrupted by a loud, shrieking voice. Then came the sound of the sharpening of swords, followed by a weird moaning, as of someone being tortured. My feelings were indescribable. I could only pray God to cut short my husband's sufferings and fill his heart with peace and give me courage to meet my lot without fear. A little later I was surprised to hear my husband's voice speaking in pleading tones. Again he was interrupted, and again came the same moaning as before. Then all was silent. My husband was killed, and I was left alone with my helpless baby. It was now dark, and all the guards had left me, so the thought came that I should creep away and hide among the mountains. I arose and started for a few steps, but the thought came, how can I go away and leave my poor husband alone? And I felt almost ashamed of myself. Ere long, the men who had brought us here came hurrying out of the temple and pulled me behind a wall, saying, the general is coming, and he can't abide the sight of a woman. There was a great firing of guns and shouting, and the whole crowd came out of the temple yard carrying, as I suppose, my husband's corpse. They came to me, and I thought, it is my turn now. A sense of weakness came over me, and though I wished to rise, I could not. A man, seeing I could not walk alone, held out an iron crook for me to hold, and taking me by the hand, led me down to the side of the river. At some distance away along the river I saw a number of lanterns, and heard a great uproar, but could see nothing distinctly. After a long while some men came along and said my husband had run away. It seemed strange to me that he should flee, especially as I thought him dead. Away back to the temple I was led again, and once more I heard the same weird moaning, and now realized that it was part of the Boxer incantations. Later on, I was locked up in a cave with only a bowl of water. In the darkness, I could make out a pile of brickwork in one side of the cave. But not till next morning did I find it was a walled-in coffin, and we had been sleeping in a tomb. My baby slept well, though water was his supper, and the cold ground his bed. His little quilt had been torn away, and I took off my own gown as the only substitute. It was late next morning before anyone came near us, when a man brought me some rice and porridge. While I was eating this poor breakfast, two of the guards came and hurried me away, and after led me some distance, they suddenly cried out, "Go and hide. The big man is coming." As I ran to hide, one of the men replied, "Hump, a big man indeed." "Yes," said the other hotly, "the big man, official, is as good as another." I suppose it was the Boxer general passing. When I rose from my place of concealment, my two guides had disappeared. So I was alone with my little Samuel, yet not alone. Oh no. Had he not said so distinctly to me yesterday, "Fear not, I am with thee"? Yes, truly I had with me the presence of one who is wonderful, Counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I could see only with one eye, but I was guided by him whose eyes run to and fro through the whole earth to show himself strong in the behalf of them whose heart is perfect towards him. My purpose now was to try and reach Tang Ning, where I heard the Peets and others were in prison, for to be with friends in prison was better than this awful freedom. At times, Boxers pretended to be about to kill me, and other times some women would come round me and give me food. Towards night, I heard that there were some Christians in a village across the river. Overjoyed at the news, I started to cross at once. Calling to a man who was drawing water on the other side, I asked him where the fort was. He pointed to the left and went away. Before I could find a shallow place, darkness came on, and I had to go through the water. In the name of the Lord, I stepped down into the water, which became deeper and deeper. My clothes made it very hard to walk in the swift current. Just as I was nearing the other shore, I suddenly stepped into deep water. Crying to God for help, I found strength to throw my little bundle on the bank. Then, as the water was sweeping us away, I felt myself lifted as by strong hands and set upon the rock. Thank God we were safe, though wet to the skin. I comforted myself by thinking we should soon be among friends, but I found only enemies. Though I told my story and entreated for a little food, they only jeered at my widowhood. That night was the first I spent under the open sky. Sometimes we had no walls, but so far always a roof. Now there seemed none beneath the cold, bright stars to pity us. Chilled to the bone, I sat there shivering and wrapping little Samuel in his wet quilt and laid him on the ground. Long after dark, 2 men came and led me to a cave. They said that was all they could do, and then left me with a "God bless you," from which I knew they were Christians, but unable to help me because of the boxers. And God did bless me, for in spite of my wet clothes and a stone for my pillow, I slept soundly. Samuel slept well too, though he had only a little cold water for supper. I woke early and started before daybreak, but in spite of all my precautions, I was seen and caught by the boxers. It was the kind interventions of a gentleman, the village headman, which saved my life. He gave me food and a pair of socks, saying at the same time, "You will remember my name when you think of these socks," his name and socks in Chinese being the same sound. This newly found friend appointed 2 gentlemen to escort me to Tangning, and though their task was no easy one, they were enabled to keep off the boxers and bring me safely to the Tangning Yamen. The boxers stamped and jumped in the frenzy of their rage, and much to the chagrin, for they hoped I should be handed over to them. I was put into the common prison. I now learned that the Pete's party had left for the coast only 2 days previously, but God had ordered for me, for all that party were killed before they got out of the Providence. The prison where I was imprisoned was situated on one side of the Yemen's front courtyard. A strong iron-faced door opened into a small yard in which were 2 rooms, both of which had earthen floors and were very filthy. When the door was closed, a little light came in through a small hole high in the wall. The K.A.M.G. brick bed was caged in by bars which reached the roof and separated into 2 cages. It looked like a place for the lowest class of criminals. The larger outer door of the prison had a hole in the center, through which was passed some bread, half a watermelon, and 1.5 dime. And the prison keepers spoke kindly to me. In the afternoon, the door was opened, and I was ordered to bring out the boy. Terror seized me as though I had been struck by a thunderbolt. I had been told in the morning that all foreign males were to be killed and the women sent home, and was advised to say my child was a girl. I had, however, when asked, said he was a boy. I was led into the courtyard, where the official sat high on his judgment seat between 2 lictors. I was ordered to kneel, and knowing this was not worship but only humility, I did so. The mandarin sternly questioned me regarding my husband, whence I came, etc. I told him my story, that my husband was dead. This he denied, though I did not believe him, thinking he only sought to clear himself of the responsibility of the murder. As I told him my story, he began to speak in kinder tones, as though moved by pity. The examination over, I was taken to see the secretary's wife. She told me she had offered a reward for finding and bringing in my husband. While there, a message came that the official's wife wished to see me. But when I was led in, she only stood on the balcony and threw down 100 cash, 3 dime. Then I was led away back to prison. Oh, how desolate I felt as I sat there with my orphan baby. My heart was heavy, but there was little chance for reflection about my misery, with the awful pain in my eye. The day wore slowly away, and in the evening I spread a mat on the ground for a bed, as the brick bed in my room was full of vermin. As the night grew colder, I went in and lay on the brick bed, where it was warmer, though sleep was impossible. As day began to break, I was falling into a doze when I seemed to hear someone call my name. Waking, I ran out into the courtyard and looked up to the hill overshadowing the prison. My heart was beating wildly as I thought, is it possible my beloved is still alive and calling down to me? Again that longed-for tender voice, Olivia, oh Olivia, but it came from the hole in the prison door. I ran to the door and looked out, saw him whom I had mourned his loss, and flooded with joy cried, "Oh, Alfred, are you really still alive? Praise God, oh, praise God." Speechless with emotion, he could only look at me. He could not even join hands because the gate between. What a sight he was, but for his voice I should scarcely have known it was he. His clothes hung in tatters, and his head was bound up with a piece of linen torn from some garment. He was quickly led away from the loophole, and I could see the boxers running wildly about in the Yemen yard. Had they seized him again at last? My heart sank at the thought, but no, he had been taken charge of by the Yemen people, and the official was waiting to receive him. Soon the prison door was opened, and together we were all taken to a fairly good room. Some water was brought me with which to wash his wounds, and a powder to help them heal. Having no bandages, I washed the blood from his muslin shirt and tore it into strips. What a sight! A great piece of scalp hung loosely down. One ear was crushed and swollen. His neck bore 2 sword gashes. Near the shoulder were 2 spear cuts, one very deep, and all his back was red and swollen from beating. I washed and cared for his wounds as well as I could. Then I boiled up some rice and mutton. The secretary's wife also brought a bowl of meat soup. By this time it was nearly evening, and we were very hungry. When we had eaten a good meal, my husband made me glad by saying how much better he felt. With rest and quiet, he would soon have been well, but that was impossible in an open room in an open Yemen. People came to see us in crowds and were so kindly and sympathetic. We had not heart to keep them out, even had we dared to try. When we had quiet, I heard my husband's story, which was as follows. When I was taken into the temple at Teochew, the Boxer General ordered me down on my knees. He asked me how many people I had misled and ruined. I assured him I had never in my life harmed anyone. He would not listen to such talk and had my hands tied behind my back, and I was bound to a block of wood when all the crowd began to kick and beat me, our former guard taking part. They heaped the most awful curse on the name of Jesus, making me shudder at their horrible blasphemies. When I asked them for a drink of water, they said, "Ask your Jesus for water." When all hope of life seemed past, I asked them to let me see and speak with my wife before I die. They said, "Ask your Jesus whether you may see her," and brutally kicked me on the head. The thought of dying without one more sight of that dear face, which had so long been my cheer, was too bitter, and I sobbed aloud. As I lay there bound to the block, they said jeeringly, "Now ask your Jesus to deliver you." I began fervently to pray, "Jesus, forgive them, for they know not what they do, but show forth thy great power, that thy name may be glorified." After a little, they loosed me from the block and led me to the riverside to kill me, as they said, my hands still bound behind my back. When we came to the river, they forced me down on my knees and sat upon me from all sides. But as their weapons clashed one against another, they did not kill me at once. Loss of blood soon made me feel faint, but I was so happy. The sweetness of his presence filled me as never before. Cutting and stabbing were as nothing, and I felt no pain. To my inward vision, heaven seemed open, and one step would take me there. I longed for deliverancy. Then came to me suddenly as a flash of lightning the thought of my wife and child. I asked myself whether you were still alive and whether we should not die together. Roused by the thought, I suddenly leaped from the midst of the crowd into the water. 30 or 40 men were standing around me, boxers and helpers. 2 started to follow, but feared the deep water. The others cried out, "Good, good, he will die in the water." I managed to get out on the other side, and with my hands still bound behind my back, started to run up the steep hillside. Then there was a great hubble, but under cover of darkness I got out of sight. My shoes were lost in the water, so I went on barefoot over the rocks, and after about 15 miles, I dared to stop and free my hands by rubbing the cords on a rock till they were worn through. And on the top of the mountain I came to the home of a Christian farmer who gave me food and drink and 200 cash, 6 dime. But, not daring to keep me in his house, he took me to a cave for the night. One man stayed with me for company, who told me I must not attempt to stay there, but go on very early in the morning. This I found strength to do, and set off for Yangning, still wishing to get home. I hid during the day in a cave, from which I could see the people running about as if in searching for something. We learned later the boxers offered a large reward for his head. After dark I set out for Yangning, but lost the way and came round again to the Tangning road. Several times I was directed the way to Yangning, but always got back to the same road in Tangning. Hearing that my wife was already there, I felt encouraged to keep on and, if possible, share the prison with my family. I was told to go in through the east gate, which was near CIM, and thus more easily escaped the Boxers. But with all my care, before I could cross the short distance to the Yangming, some Boxers discovered me and started in pursuit. I ran for my life and managed to reach the Yangming, where I was received and protected. With mingled joy and sorrow, I heard the story of this marvelous deliverance, and together we praised God for bringing us together again, even in a prison. While in this prison, some people came to visit us who, by their treatment of us, showed that they were not of this world. My husband asked them secretly about themselves, and they said they were Christians. But their own tortures had been so great, and what they heard from other places so terrible, that they had renounced their faith. Their hearts were still clung to the people of God, and they rejoiced to help us. We were glad to meet them and exhorted them not to forsake the Lord. We were greatly cheered to hear how Pastor Choi, CHU, whom we both knew, had stood the test. Not only the Boxers had sought his life, but a few renegade Christians who blamed him for all the troubles which came upon them watched for him where they knew he was hidden, but he managed to elude them all and came through alive. My husband had rejoined me on August 28th, and on the morning of August 30th, 2 donkeys arrived at the Yemen. The plan was to escort us from city to city until we reached the coast. They had only put rough wooden pack saddles without cushions or stirrups on the animals. These were so rough and hard that my husband could not ride and was obliged to walk. Our guard consisted of 4 soldiers and 4 Boxers under an officer. Our hearts sank as we thought of again coming under the power of the Boxers. Upon this journey we were treated very brutally, though the officer endeavored to restrain his men. My greatest pain was to see my wounded and suffering husband so maltreated, but he frequently said, "It is nothing to suffer for Jesus' sake." Next day we reached the first city, PU-HSIEN, and were kindly received by the officials who gave us good food and even tried to buy milk for little Samuel. That evening, however, brought us bad news. The officials at the prefectuary city, Pangyangfu, would not receive us. The PU-HSIEN people were very kind and advised us to request the officials to permit us to remain there, as no Boxers had ever lived in the place. We had no opportunity to do so, for we did not see the official again, and the next morning we had to start back to Taining. Our journey back was one of great suffering. We were practically deserted by our guard, starved and exhausted, yet eventually we reached the city of Taining. But now a new testing time came. Our little Samuel had suffered so much from starvation and hardship that he fell very sick. By the 3rd day he was too weak to cry. It seemed almost impossible for the poor limp little boy to recover, yet we pleaded with God to spare him. The official gave us 100 cash, 3 dime, and 1 bowl of rice per day. We gave the money for 2 bowls of milk, which a man offered to sell us, and we managed as best we could with the bowl of rice between us. The fresh milk was better than medicine, and we praised God as we saw the child grow stronger and stronger. We began to hope that the end of our distress was near, but it was not so. My second eye began to swell, and I sat day and night, helpless and suffering. My poor husband soon utterly collapsed and became delirious with fever. He was haunted by the belief that we were being chased, and he caught up the baby and wanted to flee for his life. It was impossible for me to keep him quiet, and I was obliged to call in the help of other prisoners. We spread the old bedding the official had given us on the vile brick bed, and after binding his hands, tied him down to the bed. God only knows the horrid misery of those hours. Here lay my poor husband, who had lately been so strong and cheerful. There our baby, picture of health and admiration of all when we left home. Now a mere living skeleton, and well, for me, I could not see my own face, for surely there would have been little comfort in the sight. My cup of suffering was now full, almost overrunning. After that awful night, my husband seemed to get a little better. I rejoiced to be able to loose his bonds, and in a few days we could join in prayer and take sweet counsel together from my precious treasure, the Bible. My eyes being less painful and the baby steadily improved, I was now buying only 1 bowl of milk per day and spending the other 50 cash for meat for my husband. The jailer scolded me for doing so, and the official cautioned me several times against wasting my money. I longed to give my husband some nutritious food, and had I known how near his end he was, I should have gone even at the risk of my life and begged the official to help us in our extremities. I was limiting poor little Samuel to 1 bowl of milk per day, and I had begun to give part of my rice for a little more milk, which meant robbing myself of much-needed food. The official hearing I was selling part of my rice for milk, both stopped giving the rice and forbade the milkman to call. The prison den became intolerable, and harder than all the weariness and starvation were the filth and the vermin. Only those who had endured such conditions can know the torture. The very sight of the filthy surroundings brought scathing tears to my eyes. But whatever might be denied me, no one could deny me the precious privilege of prayer. What rest